I've taught hundreds of beginner piano students over the years, and I know from experience, if you are starting out on the instrument, these are the 10 mistakes you are most likely to be making. We'll start small with technical things and then get broader from there. So the first is something that may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many students do not even have a sustain pedal. If you have an acoustic instrument, this is built in, but a lot of folks with keyboards don't even have a sustain pedal. So that's something that looks like this. I like keyboard sustain pedals that have a rubber pad like this so it doesn't scooch around. This matters because the sustain pedal is a big part of the sound of the instrument. You know, if I play chords without the pedal, you'll hear the difference when I add the pedal in. It gives this sense of connection and sustain that makes a huge difference, especially when you're wanting chords to sound connected to each other. So when people start out playing chords and they don't even have a pedal or they're not aware of how to use it, this can make a big difference to how good their playing sounds. Mistake number 2 is keeping your fingers in a line to match the line of the keys. A lot of times students notice that the edge of the keys is straight like this, and they assume that means that your fingertips should also be in a line parallel to that. And that's just not the case. Notice how deep into the keys I'm playing with some of my fingers and not others. Basically, you want to think of moving the natural shape of your hand forward until your thumb can play comfortably. And that means that my fingertips are actually at quite different places along the lever of the key, and that's fine. That's what we want. We don't want you to have to contort your hand into a weird shape. And it can be a little odd feeling for new students to be this deep in amongst the black keys, but that is the correct way to play when you play a chord like this E-flat major chord. Mistake number 3 is ignoring the importance of fingering. And by fingering, I mean which fingers are you using to play which notes. If I play a melodic phrase like that, I could make that so much harder if I used different fingers. Right? I didn't change anything about the notes, but because I'm using different fingers on different notes, it becomes much more difficult to play. And my best suggestion is to constantly experiment with which fingers you're using with any piece of music you play. There is no one single best fingering, even for something like a major chord or a scale. And sometimes students get mixed up about this because we do tend to give formal prescriptive fingerings for things like major scales when we introduce new students to the piano. But depending on the context, you might use a totally different fingering for something like a scale, or for something like this E-flat major chord. I'm playing it in second inversion here. I might sometimes want to use fingers 1, 3, and 5. But if I want to get to this note, I might actually use fingers 2, 4, and 5 so that I can easily then reach that G with finger 1. So experimenting with different options for fingerings on the music you're playing is a really important part of becoming better at the piano. Mistake number 4 is rhythmic inconsistency. This means you start playing a piece of music, and then in an unnatural way, you add some time. You add a beat or two while you find the next note or chord in the piece. And this is the biggest giveaway when you're playing simple pop music between a professional and a beginner. A lot of times, in many styles of music, the material you're playing is actually not that complex. But the thing that makes it sound like someone's a really great musician is that they never drop a beat. And they may even make occasional mistakes, but you don't notice because they keep the pulse of the music going. Professionals are really used to doing this because we play with other people and we play for audiences. So you get familiar with the feeling that once you start a piece of music, it's bigger than you. The beat has to keep going. The show must go on. So even if you make a little mistake, you have to keep playing. And that's often very challenging for beginners. So early on in your practice, you can make this an important part of what you do. Play pieces that are relatively easy for you and really focus on keeping the music going, whether or not you make some small mistakes. Number 5 also has to do with rhythm, and it's misunderstanding coordination between the hands. Many times when I talk to folks who are beginner pianists, they'll talk about how their biggest challenge is coordinating their two hands. It's so hard to do two things at the same time. I think this sometimes has to do with a misunderstanding of how that works. It's not that we practice one hand by itself and then the other hand by itself, and then we get them both going at the same time and they have to magically go at the same speed so they match. Instead, I want you to think of them as belonging to the same thing. They belong to the same piece of music. They belong to the same feeling of rhythm that you've initiated once you start the piece. So think of what the two hands are doing as two wheels on the same train, rather than two trains on separate tracks that you're trying to perfectly match their speed. And I have another video where I use that metaphor that's just about hand coordination. You may find helpful if this isn't making sense to you. Mistake number 6 has to do with one of my favorite practice suggestions to help you with these things like rhythm, and that's to record yourself. Many students never ever record themselves in their practice, even though this is so easy to do now. You can just pull up a voice memo on your phone and record a little bit of your playing. This is one of the best things that you can do to get better faster, because while you're playing, you cannot be as observant as you can when you're just listening to your own playing. This is also why having a teacher can be so useful, right? They're going to have perspective outside of yours and they can give you feedback. But even if you have weekly private lessons, you are doing most of your learning on your own. If you're referencing something like an online course or YouTube lessons, the fact remains that you need to have a feedback loop between what you do on the instrument and some sort of observation of how it sounds. So most of the time, no matter who you are, you have to be your own best teacher, and you're going to be a more effective teacher to yourself if you record your own playing and listen back. Mistake number 7 is always reading, never memorizing your music. Now, I want to broaden this out not just to mean reading traditional sheet music, because if you're learning, especially if you're learning pop music in 2025, you might be learning from YouTube tutorials, you might be learning from chord charts or lead sheets. I'm a big proponent of those methods of learning new songs. But regardless of these resources, you're leaving potential skill development on the table if you always play the song with the resource in front of you, right? If you're learning from a tutorial on YouTube, if you only can play the song if you're also watching along with the video, or if you can only play songs when you have a chord chart or lead sheet in front of you, you're missing out on an important opportunity to develop your musicianship. Memorizing music and internalizing a piece of music will mean that it has a totally different impact on your long-term development than if you're always tied to the page or the video or whatever it may be. So memorizing at least a few of your favorite songs and keeping a song list for yourself of the songs you can play from memory is a really, really good idea. And that might push you towards playing slightly easier pieces of music, which is a good thing. It's better to play a bigger volume of easier pieces earlier on than to pick one heroic, super challenging piece and never play any easier pieces and just imagine that you're going to keep practicing until you can play that one hard piece perfectly. It's a better idea to play lots of simple things, memorize them, and the overall level of your musicianship will get better over time that way. Mistake number 8 is only ever playing alone. A lot of folks learning on YouTube, you may have a keyboard and you may only even practice in headphones because you don't want your family members to hear you. And that's totally understandable when you're a beginner. You don't necessarily have to play in a group with other people to get the experience of playing with other musicians. My suggestion here is to play along with recordings. A lot of great musicians do a lot of their practice and learning this way. Play along with a recording, and it's the closest thing you can get when you're alone to playing with other people in a band. And there are aspects of musicianship that develop when you do this that you simply can't develop playing by yourself. It's a little like if you want to learn to speak a language with an accent that sounds natural. You can't do that by just reading the words in a book and reciting them aloud to yourself over and over again. You actually have to be in conversation with native speakers. And that's the same thing if you're playing along with great recordings, or eventually you want to be playing with other musicians in person, and then you develop all of these really important ensemble skills. Our last 2 points both have to do more with the psychology of learning an instrument. So one is overthinking. If you are here on Music YouTube, you may be a victim of a very common kind of YouTube music learning syndrome that I see all the time in students. I want you to remember that 10 minutes of great practice on your instrument will have a bigger impact on your musicianship than 10 hours of passively watching YouTube. It doesn't matter how great the material is. Playing an instrument is a very physical thing, and it's just not going to matter for your actual ability to play music to watch tons and tons of YouTube videos. So don't overthink things. As adults, we have a tendency to think that we can kind of think our way around the problem. And in reality, most of the things that you want to learn when you're learning an instrument just have to work themselves out by the actual practice of playing music. So don't overthink things. I'm glad that you're here watching this video, but keep in mind that there's kind of a point of diminishing returns with watching YouTube content like this. And it should be part of a bigger picture. If you really want to learn and improve at the piano, the most important thing you do every day is to actually physically play your instrument. And the last common mistake is neglecting the opportunity to get feedback from other people. You can do this a lot of different ways. You can play what you're learning for your family and friends. You'll get a lot out of that. You can also seek out an in-person teacher who will give you feedback on how you're progressing. There are also things like my membership program, online programs. In my program, there's an opportunity for every student to get feedback on what they're doing. You can post what you're working on a forum where I will respond to every student. And we also have a live class every week. The most common reason people don't seek out feedback like this is just perfectionism. It's very vulnerable to present a work in progress to other people. But if you're not willing to do this, it's going to be much, much harder for you to improve. And the best thing is to embrace a mindset of imperfection. You're a work in progress. You're learning. You're going to learn a lot more if you just throw yourself in and make a mess. And give other people, whether it's your peers or a more experienced teacher like myself, the opportunity to give you some feedback on obvious things that you may be missing. That's it. Those are our 10 beginner mistakes. Even if there was just one thing here that you were neglecting, I hope you try my suggestion for how to correct it, and you may be surprised by what it opens up for you at the piano. If you're curious to learn more about my membership program that I mentioned, where you have the opportunity to get feedback directly from me, we'll leave a link for that. That's at my website, pianofluency.com. And you can also subscribe for more free piano education content like this. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency. Thanks for joining me.